Issue 102. We start out with freak weather conditions happening all over Mobius, reminding me of the Days of Fury in Archie, requiring Sonic to guide some people out of a blizzard in the spring. They're caused by Eggman, aren't they? After Sonic briefly slips from the snow, not letting his grip get kept by his shoes, he's complimented about keeping his cool, and he returns some kids to their mothers as they're stuck in a snowball. Sonic splashes a boy with water from charging up a run and apologizes, saying that the snow is sloppier now. It immediately changes to scorching heat, and floods show up because of the melted snow, with Sonic saying to a civilian, "You figure it out, doughball." The dialogue making that civilian say duh was very forced though. No one would ever say that. They would say but never duh, unless they were being sarcastic to mess with him. With the civilians with Sonic in a raft, people start to get worried about Eggman causing the weather and the end of the world. I mean, why wouldn't he? Maybe he would be lashing out because he's not ruler of the world anymore. They have every reason to assume this. And Sonic just dismisses the possibility that Eggman did it, which is uncharacteristically genre blind of him, and he doesn't even try to rationalize it with, like, if he destroyed the world with weather conditions like this, there'd be nothing left for him to rule anymore. A civilian looks at a weather forecast that accurately predicts the crazy weather. Just after a geek faints in a panic, he falls into snow because the water already froze. It sure is convenient that it turns into snow and not ice, because if he fell into ice, that would hurt. And he might fall through it, and uh-oh. Sonic gets very suspicious of a weather forecaster who's always right, without explaining that it's because he knows that weather forecasts aren't always right. And he wonders if she's to blame for all the weather as hailstones start to fall. I guess he really is the cynical, paranoid type, since he just immediately jumps to the paranoid conspiracy theorist conclusion. After all of the experience that he's had with fighting Robotnik, where you think that he would just assume that it's Robotnik's fault. He finds out that she is to blame, because she had a promising career lined up as a weapons engineer until Eggman was defeated, and she gets Sonic struck by lightning as revenge. Cool, a female villain that's mostly independent from Eggman. I'm sure Sonic will be fine, he's got plenty of ring energy to spare. But yeah, like, this is pretty interesting. She explains that she's firing particles into the atmosphere to create a sudden heat wave, which would destroy everything. If that's all she wanted to do, why didn't she just do that to start with? She would have won if she hadn't wasted time showing off. Of course, Sonic's fine. Windy, for some reason, admits that she's crazy. And Sonic uses his super speed to wreck her machine with water because she didn't think to make a machine that causes snow and floods to be waterproof. Windy gets sucked up by a tornado, and Sonic for some reason tries to save her, telling her to grab his hand. She's sucked into the tornado and the machine blows up, and Sonic says to a civilian that the reason he keeps cool in a crisis is because he tries not to let things get him down, calling the geek his pal. But yeah, like, this was interesting. Like, they actually show someone being frustrated for a pretty good reason at Robotnik being taken down. They lost their career option because of him. Like, that's kind of a reality ensues moment. Like, some people are going to be selfish. We start out the next story with Super Sonic having a nightmare about a twisted version of himself gloating that all life in Mobius had been destroyed, and then he gets threatened himself. He wakes up screaming, and he tells the woman who was generously letting him stay with her, Marge, that he had that nightmare again. Marge's husband wishes that Super Sonic would go endure the nightmare someplace else, even though he was already awake anyways, and had finished his breakfast, so it's not like he woke him up. And the back of his newspaper says that Super Sonic is still nowhere to be found. A disaster waiting to happen for Super, since he's gonna get kicked out when they realize who he is. Marge's husband, I'm just gonna call him Homer says that he can't afford to keep Super around with his pension, and reasons in an argument that he'll manage without the robot troopers around. Well, Marge stands up for him, saying, "You're not throwing that boy out, I won't stand for that." She accuses him of preferring when Eggman was in charge, and he says that at least he made the trains run on time, which they don't anymore for some reason. This is based off the urban legend that in the worst era of Germany, the trains ran on time. They didn't. Super decides to leave on his own. Marge says that her mother had warned her about marrying her smirking husband. And Super asks them not to argue since he probably feels guilty about it, and says that he's not going to find out who he is by staying here. If only he had looked on the back of the newspaper. I don't think he'd like what he'd find out. Marge gives him some money to try to manage on his own, and he says, "Thank you, you've been very kind to me, I won't forget it." So far, he's nicer than Sonic. And it's not like Sonic went evil and he took all the good, so where's the logic in this? Really, him becoming good makes no sense. He's supposed to be the evil side of Sonic. You'd think he'd just become like Scourge. Instead, he's like Sonic without being rude. We learn that Super was given the beer money of Marge's husband, and he's surprised by that even though I thought he was right there in the room when she did that. Johnny uses a tracking device to pick up Super's energy, learning where he's been, and Johnny says that there's not much they can do because the signal's way too weak for them to track him. Amy says that he's harmless now with his powers exhausted, with Super walking right by them, and Johnny guesses that the creep will make a run for it. Why can't he hear them? Johnny says he'll be miles away by now, and Super still doesn't hear them right behind him, and the story ends with them somehow not noticing each other in a white void of artist laziness. I'm really not used to this. I grew up reading the regular old Archie comics, not the Sonic ones, and I don't remember those ever having backgrounds this lazy. So I'm spoiled by that, I guess. In the next story, we see the farmer and the paranormal investigator also tied up with vines near Sonic, and Sonic says, "I will not be beaten by a potato!" Somehow, Sonic goes into a spin dash and breaks free of the vines that were restraining him, letting him free everyone, and letting a farmer attack some of the veggie people afterwards. He drags the paranormal investigator with him to the place shut down after Eggman was defeated, Chemical Plant Zone, which wasn't cleaned up as some toxic green liquid is leaking into the river near it. Predictably, this is what mutated the vegetables, by seeping into the soil from the river that I guess hydrates it. For some reason, Sonic assumes that the farmer should have caught up to them by now. I guess he has a hard time taking into account that not everyone's as fast as him. He tells the investigator, Harry, to close off that pipe, getting the assumption that the farmer is in trouble again because the plot demands it, when really he shouldn't be assuming this so easily. Sonic runs around in a tornado to free the farmer from the turnip people, a mob of angry villagers calls for roasting the vegetables alive, and Sonic says that would be wrong because these vegetables are still people, even though they're evil. It turns out only the king was evil, having a chip on his shoulder about everything, while the other vegetables at least claim to be innocent and not mean harm, having been only following orders. I don't understand, like, did the king really intimidate them? Is that why they just did what he said? Then for some reason, the farmer that was attacked by the veggie people earlier decides to defend them, and he sweetly offers them a section of land as long as they live in peace. Aw, that was weird. The first and third stories were by Lou Stringer. In the first story, after a bunch of natural disasters where it fluctuates between heat waves and blizzards, there's a clever twist as it isn't Eggman who did this out of frustration, but a disgruntled weather girl who used to be in line for a top weapons engineer career until Eggman was taken out. You know, you'd think that she would just be hired by a military. It's pretty realistic that the people who had job prospects because of him wouldn't be happy at losing them, but I don't understand why she lost them in the first place. And I guess she got killed off by her own tornado as karma for trying to destroy the world. Which would have destroyed her too, by the way, but maybe she didn't care about that. Since Sonic doesn't mourn her afterwards or feel guilty and blame himself, maybe he only thought he wanted to save her life. Again, League Sonic is pretty fascinating. In the second story, by Nigel Kitchen, Super leaves the house he was staying at. A good thing too, since Homer didn't have the money to afford him and he probably caused them to divorce anyways over him supporting Robotnik. And the story ends with the bullshit that Super and Amy never noticed each other despite Amy talking about him, and Super just blankly stares into the distance walking away from her, being portrayed as creepy when he's not really. And in the third story, Sonic triumphs over the veggie people because he somehow escaped from vines restraining him, so he shouldn't have been able to curl up into a spin dash at all. And like, the spines on his head, I don't think they would be able to reach to the vines in the position that he would be in, restrained, but whatever. It turns out that they get to have a section of farmland to themselves, because most of them were only following their evil king's orders. That was sweet of the farmer to do. And I love that the people were explained they're mutants caused by a toxic liquid from Chemical Plant Zone leaking into the river that created them, instead of making them all die horribly.